To anyone and everyone who might be watching this, I'm going to be giving a brief presentation on deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. So it's been in the headlines recently, like in the past year, and we're seeing a lot of headlines about the forest being on fire. That's been the biggest thing lately, but it's a pretty complex issue beyond that, and I kind of want to get into that today. And basically, there are two sides. There's the government in Brazil currently because of people who've been elected, and then there's basically everyone else who, and by everyone else I just mean like environmentalists in general populations of other foreign countries, etc. So first things first, what is a rainforest? Rainforests occur in wet, tropical, humid, warm parts of our planet. They're pretty much just they pretty much just occur in places where there are high facilitative factors for photosynthesis. So when you've got a lot of photosynthesis going on because of those things I mentioned a bit ago, there's a lot of free energy in the ecosystem. There's a lot of competition among species, among individuals for that energy, and that leads to speciation. So that's why rainforests are the most biodiverse ecosystems on the planet. That's why you hear people say, "Oh, rainforests are biodiverse." That's what that means. And they also have a lot of resources in them. Obviously, they've got a lot of wood, but they're also on some pretty valuable land for the most part because the Amazon's flat. It's great for agriculture, and it's also got a lot of oil deposits, a lot of natural gas, a lot of gold, a lot of potential dams that people want to use. That's why people want to see it deforested. Nobody actually wants to destroy the rainforest. They just want to get to the things inside of it. And some brief history regarding deforestation in the Amazon. Basically, it spiked in the 90s because of capitalism. It also was really high in the 70s and the 80s because the government wanted to expand its influence in the Amazon region. I'm talking about Brazil specifically here. That's all I'm going to talk about in this presentation, just Brazil. Brazil makes up about 60% of the Amazon rainforest. It's the hotspot for deforestation right now. So that's what the focus is going to be. And basically, because of cattle and soy expansion into the forest from the southeast in Brazil, that's why we're seeing such high deforestation pretty much for all of time that's been for pretty much all of time that's been deforested. And during that time, it's been an area about the size of France that's been destroyed. Which, when you compare the Amazon to being about the size of Western Europe, that's pretty significant. Basically, a really important trend is that deforestation actually vastly decreased in the mid 2000s to mid 2010s. And that was because of pretty much just backlash within Brazil to the accelerated deforestation rates and international pressure as well. And so the government decided to create soy and beef moratoriums, which would prevent people from buying or prevent companies from buying soy and beef that was grown on recently deforested land. They also kind of vastly increased the amount of land that was actually protected by like 20 or 30% just within a few years in the late 2010s, or the late 2000s, that is. This is the Amazon. This is where it is. If nobody knows, it's in South America. You can see Brazil makes up the vast majority of it. Pretty much just that entire center part is Brazil. You can see the Amazon River snaking through the middle of the forest. So this is kind of a chart of deforestation rates. By deforestation rates, I mean the amount of forest cleared per year. And so as you can see, it peaked in the early 2000s and in the 90s, but it kind of decreased significantly during the 2010s, but now it's starting to rise again. And that's a really important trend right now because that's basically a pro-deforestation agenda in Brazil that has caused that. So the first side we're going to talk about on this issue is the pro-deforestation side. And recently that has mostly been populists in Brazil, populist leaders and agriculture companies and giants and businessmen just having an influence over the government that's caused this. So an interesting thing about Brazil is that they actually don't have any PACs or super PACs. There's some pretty strict laws regarding not being able to regarding companies not being allowed to donate to politicians and to campaigns, but it doesn't prevent them from actually making their own campaigns for that politician, and it doesn't prevent people in the agricultural business from running for elections. So you see a lot of people in ag businesses, in like cattle businesses and soy businesses, actually running for government so that they can influence policy to improve their own business standings. One example of that, a person who does that, is a guy named Blairo Maggi. He obviously likes soy. He's standing in front of a soy field in this picture, so obviously he really likes it. But he was actually the Minister of Agriculture, Livestock, and Supply in Brazil for a few years, which is basically the division of the government that actually oversees development in the Amazon and expansion of these soy farms and of these cattle ranches. And it's a big no-no in my eyes. I mean, I'm supposed to be impartial, but basically, Blairo, he owns the Blairo Group, or he used to. He still has business interest in it. He still has a majority stock share. But that's one of the biggest companies that actually owns a lot of these soy fields in Brazil. So when you have somebody who's actually involved in the business is running the government agency that's supposed to control it, that's a good example of how deforestation is being allowed to accelerate. And that's one side of the story. And him, like many other populist and ruralist, quote unquote, leaders and people, they have business interests in the Amazon, and that's why they're pro-deforestation. That's why they have pro-deforestation agendas in the government. And another person I'm going to talk about on this side of the story is a guy named Jair Bolsonaro. Jair Bolsonaro is another populist leader. He's actually the current president of Brazil. And he was elected basically as backlash to government corruption in Brazil prior to him, and because of a crime wave and an economic crisis that was in Brazil. He kind of was pretty obviously against that stuff. He was very blatantly anti-corruption, like anti-violent crime, strict punishment, stuff like that. But he's also got a very pro-agriculture agenda. And that's because he's a member, he was a member of a specific libertarian party within Brazil that was getting a lot of their, attention. They were giving a lot of their attention to agricultural businesses, and that was mainly because of their funding. So, in the recent years, and I'll explain that with this chart, as you can see, I showed you earlier that deforestation rates in Brazil are increasing. And that's basically, specifically from 2018 to 2019, it's been one of the sharpest spikes per year ever. And especially in recently, it's been like 10 years, or no, it's been like 20 years since it was a spark, or that sharp. Anyways, that's mainly because of his deforestation policies, or his Amazon policies specifically. He's been pretty much blatantly, I don't care about the Amazon. He said actually once, where there's indigenous land, there is wealth underneath it. So he's pretty blatantly trying to exploit the Amazon for its resources. And that is, basically that's a bunch of little things about the pro-deforestation side of this argument. Now I'm going to move on to the anti-deforestation side, which is more of a international group of people, not nearly as, together as the populist movement is in Brazil, which is the pro-deforestation side. Anyways, so there are a few different arguments for why people think the Amazon should be preserved. One good quote is one from Emmanuel Macron, who said recently of the fires in Brazil that the Amazons, that are our world's lungs, the Amazon, are on fire. So that's like kind of the argument. That's like pretty much summarizes actually the argument for preserving the Amazon. It's preserving the resources, the ecosystem services, the biodiversity within it that is of value of us. And that perspective is basically based on the root argument that the Amazon is more valuable intact than it is destroyed. So, and that's because the Amazon can do a lot of things. It's a carbon sink. It influences water cycle. It's got a lot of biodiversity. There's potential new medicines within the forest. And there are hundreds of thousands of indigenous people within the forest who call it their home pretty much. And that's why people want to keep it protected. This image right here actually is basically kind of helps allude to how the Amazon plays an important part in the water cycle in Brazil. This isn't fire. These are actually clouds formed by transpiration. And transpiration is basically the direct evaporation of water from trees. through the stomata of plant cells. I'm not going to get into the chemistry or the biology of that, but basically it's pretty influential water cycle. About 1/3 of the water or the rain within Brazil comes directly from transpiration. It's being recycled constantly, and without the Amazon, that rain would never pretty much fall, and it could have some pretty drastic effects potentially. This is all just science. It could have some drastic effects on the water table and the water cycle within Brazil. There will be more droughts probably. There are more droughts actually. This has been observed before. There are more droughts, and there seems to be worse flash floods as well because the rainfall is more irregular. And that could have some pretty profound impacts on local communities and on agriculture, which are both pretty much driving forces for Amazon deforestation. So it's kind of an antithesis to why they want to see it destroyed. Another important, well, actually, I should probably show you where this picture is. This little section of the Amazon that you saw right there, that's just this little spot right here. It's a few 100,000 square kilometers, I'd say. Man, probably about 100,000 maybe. Anyways, this is an interesting thing. So I mentioned indigenous groups. There actually are some uncontacted tribes in the Amazon, probably more than anywhere else in the world. This is just a picture of one taken from a helicopter. Anyways, that's one reason. Another reason why people want to see the Amazon protected is just for preservation of these people's ways of life, so that we don't disturb them. A lot of them want to be just left alone, pretty much. And then one last important point that a lot of environmentalists bring up is that the Amazon is a massive carbon sink. And so if we destroy the Amazon, we basically release all that carbon into the atmosphere, which would only accelerate climate change. And that's another argument for why the Amazon should be protected, basically. And then there's also biodiversity. Obviously, rainforests are pretty interesting. They've got a lot of life in them. That was a really bad explanation, I'm sorry. But I mentioned earlier why biodiversity is so high in rainforests. A lot of people want to see that preserved because it's an important part of the natural history of our planet. This is a flame-faced tanager. It's a species what's a species of tanager, obviously, from the western Amazon, kind of where it pushes up against the Andes. So they're from mid-elevation forests there. And there's one species of literally thousands. They're called the Amazon and other rainforests in South America. They're home. Species of birds, that is. There are probably millions of actual species, like ignoring birds. But this is just one example of an interesting animal that people wanted to see protected and that wouldn't exist without the Amazon. And that's it. Thank you for watching.